All right, I'll ask you the next question, and this will go to Mr. Kuhn first. How satisfied are you that a Rita Crundwell-style theft could not occur again in Dixon city government?
The Rita Crundwell scandal is probably the low point ever in the city of Dixon. This current city council responded immediately. That morning, when I received the phone call, the wheels were already starting to turn on what needed to be done. The current council reacted. We didn't sit by and say, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? In the sequence, first thing we did was inform everybody in the city what's going on. We fired her as soon as our legal team would allow us to do that. The finance department was in shambles. We brought in 2 temporary comptrollers from the government temp organizations. Help, what do we do? Get us back where we need to be. We brought in a new finance director. We brought in a city administrator. They completely reworked the finance department. To spend any money now, it is a very long process. It could go in front of as many as 8 different people to purchase a sledgehammer, for example. Everybody, the person who buys it has to sign it, the department head has to sign it. It comes to the commissioner, it goes to the finance director, it goes to the council on one sledgehammer. Everybody is overseeing everything anymore. I can't say it will never happen again. It is something that would be extremely difficult to happen.
Okay, Mr. Arellano.
You're never going to know. Vigilance and financial oversight is part of what a governing body does. And ideally, one of the focuses of a new council, since they're not in day-to-day operations, should be financial oversight. But the answer is you are never going to know. You're never going to know. Fraud's always possible, and the more vigilant you are and the more diligent you are, the less likely it is. The council did do a lot of steps. From what I've seen, Paula Meyer's been excellent as finance director. They brought in a city administrator, which is another thing my opponent opposed in July. He said he preferred a facilitator, sort of like our former city engineer. He wasn't even comfortable with the idea of a city administrator at first, although I believe it came around to that. But ultimately, some of the things that weren't done as well is 3 out of 5, which is a majority of the council members, opposed the change of form of government, and no sitting member advocated for it, not a single one. So the question before the voters is, who are they going to choose to implement this new form of government? A majority council, all of whom opposed it or didn't support it? But to the original question, you always have to be vigilant. You're never going to know for sure.
Okay, Mr. Kuhn?
Not exactly sure what your comments are about with the change of manager. The question is on a different point. You mentioned facilitator. From the one meeting you were at there when that was mentioned, I said we need somebody to facilitate the city, to be the go-to person to make things work. That's where the word facilitator came up. You have 2 options. You go with an administrator or you go with a manager. The choice was made to go with administrator at that time because we thought that would be the easiest way to get somebody in there to do the day-to-day work. Never called for a facilitator. I said somebody to facilitate the needs.
Mr. Arellano.
It was quoted in the paper. You can look it up online. In July of last year, he was specifically mentioning his problems with even a city administrator. So I guess I can only read quotes, and if the quote's wrong, then I'm wrong.
Okay, Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Kuhn and Mr. Arellano, you represent distinct choices for Dixon voters. Mr. Kuhn, you are 63, a retired teacher, and teachers union negotiator with 4 years service on the city council. Mr. Arellano, you are 34, have a military background, are a local businessman, and were an unsuccessful candidate for state representative in 2012. How do you believe your individual background will help you do the job of mayor if elected?
Well, as I've mentioned, I think my key background is in leadership. Military leadership, very experienced in both business leadership and military side, and understanding economic development and how it directly impacts businesses. So as I've mentioned previously tonight, one of the jobs of the mayor is to be the public advocate for the city. He's going to be the point person in dealing with other governmental bodies. He's going to be the public face when you're doing a lot of your economic development, talking to developers. So one of the strengths I bring, obviously, is I share their background. I can talk to them in the language they understand and tell them, what's great about that. And in terms of my approach, obviously being 34, I'm going to be living in the city for a very long time. I'm going to be owning those choices I make as mayor for a very long time. I have 2 young daughters who are going to be growing up in the city, and I hope have an amazing experience. And everything I do is going to be focused on what can we do for the city right now, but also what is best for the long term of the city. What am I going to experience as I'm older? What are my daughters going to experience? And that's the approach I'm going to take to everything.
Mr. Kuhn.
My background was in education when I first came to town. In education, you learn to communicate, you learn to work with people, you learn to be organized, you learn to be a problem solver, all of which I'm going to bring to the table, my expertise. In the area of teaching, I taught mathematics, which was an outstanding way to learn logic, problem solving. And the greater of the two is I did teach government. I taught government on the local level, on the state level, on the federal level. It was my teaching in the junior high that allowed the students to pass the Constitution test, which everybody has to take to pass there. So I do have a background in government. I brought in the Government Day exercises. When we brought them into the city, I was that representative. My students worked with the council. We went down to Springfield. We worked with the General Assembly. I let my students experience government on a first-hand basis. The experience on the council speaks for itself. If you learn the process, if you're there, if you see what's going on, it's a much better way to go through things. You can read about it, you can talk about it until you've actually lived it. It's a whole lot different thing. So having been there on the council, having taught students the different parts of government, logic, problem solving, this is made for better people, for our citizens, and this is made for better people being more involved in government.
Mr. Arellano?
Yeah, on the topic of experience, which obviously my opponent keeps mentioning, I would match my leadership experience against just about anybody. I may be 34, but 2 combat tours. You talk about real-world repercussions. The choices you make for you and your men in a combat zone are absolutely critical, and there's just no way to replicate that. And you want to talk about real-world repercussions to budgets, try owning a small business during a recession, which I did. And I came out on the other side ready to expand, which I also did. So I'd match my experience with anybody.
Mr. Kuhn?
Well, I never have been in combat. I chose education as my public service to the country, and I appreciate you going into combat. I never had the privilege of doing that. I do, however, can state that I have taught junior high for 33 years. If you ever get in the classroom and you want to face problem solving at the junior high level, sometimes it might be easier to get shot at. But seriously, I believe I know how to work with people. I have led the students. I have coached state championship teams. I've been there. I've worked with them.
And I will say I have a lot of respect for teachers. The advantage of being a business owner when you hire a high school student is if you have problems with them, you can ultimately deal with them. As a teacher, you have to make them better no matter what. So I respect that as well.
Thank you. Mr. Bengarini?
This election is nonpartisan. There's no declared Republican or Democrat on the ballot. How would you describe your political leanings in that context? Meaning, are you conservative, liberal, libertarian, progressive, green, Tea Party? How will those leanings influence your approach to being mayor?
What was this?
Let's see, Mr. Kuhn?
Yes, sorry.
I thought it was. Okay, am an election judge. Also, I've served the community as that, and I'm a registered Republican. You have to be registered if you're going to be an official. So I'm registered as a Republican. Very moderate. I definitely say I tend to spend most of my time right in the middle, which is rather interesting. And most facts of life, teachers are Democratic. I usually don't agree with them. However, I am somebody who faces questions on what is the best solution. I can very easily and truthfully say I have voted Republican, I have voted Democrat. It doesn't really matter to me. It's the position, it's the person that tends the most. If I needed to do something more of a, going to label me, I would say you can, call me a moderate, almost independent if you wish. I will go back and forth on the issues. So I think that probably sums it up as good as anything.
Okay, Mr. Arellano?
Yeah, I would describe myself as a real-world practical conservative. In other words, I tend to support conservative, balanced budgets, long-term thinking budgets. That's what I found worked best in my personal life and in business. but you always have to factor in the real-world repercussions of what you do. And that's, you know, a reflection of my military background and my business background. You can talk ideology all you want, but if you're a businessman trying to make ends meet, you better do what works. And you better be honest with yourself what that is, or you might pay some serious repercussions. But I am a Republican. I ran in the Republican primary when I did run for state representative. And I would say I tend to lean more towards the conservative, although it really depends issue to issue. I've voted for candidates from different party backgrounds myself as well. And Jeff's right about that. It comes down to who's the best candidate. I will say I find Jeff's response curious because in his ad he described himself as progressive on one side of the ad and conservative on the other. So I'd be curious to see how he explains that he's both of those ideologies at the same time.
Mr. Kuhn.
Very simple. A progressive is a person that wants things to move forward, somebody who wants to improve different things. Republicans can want things to improve. Democrats can want things to improve. Progressive just simply means, you know, how do you want to go about things? Conservative? Yeah, I probably, if I had to say, you know, between the conservative or liberal, more conservative, but more towards the middle of the whole thing there. Progressive, I want it to move forward. Conservative, I want it to be fiscally responsible. I want it to be done correctly.
Mr. Arellano.
Progressive and conservative are pretty much opposing political ideals, so I don't know that someone can be both of those at the same time.
All right, it's time for closing statements. And Mr. Kuhn will give the first closing statement.
I'd like to thank the panel for your contributions to today's debate, as well as my opponent here. The selection of the mayor is a very important event for a city. This is particularly true in Dixon this year, in that the new council will be charged with the implementation of the city manager form of government. The mayor must lead the way in transitioning the change. I have shown that I possess the experience as well as the desire to facilitate this change. Dixon has grown as a city in many marvelous ways, from the implementing of the transparency program that I led at the request of the citizens, to the improvements in the infrastructure, the renovation of the riverfront and downtown, making them a destination for business, the arts, and entertainment. Dixon is a wonderful place to live with a high quality of life. I would like to continue the progress and make Dixon worthy of its wonderful citizens.
Mr. Arellano.
Yeah, I think this election is going to come down to two big major things. And one is who is best suited to implementing the change in the form of government, because that's going to be the biggest task ahead. And as I've mentioned, I've been advocating for changing that form of government for years. Not always the lead advocate. There was a great group that did it in the lead up to the election, and they spearheaded that, and they should get a bulk of the credit for that electoral result. But I have been supporting it for years. So who do the voters want to implement that? Somebody who's been advocating it for years, or somebody who up till the day of the actual election was one of the leading voices against it? And the second thing it's going to turn on is who is best suited to maintain and ramp up Dixon's economic and cultural successes. And I think my background is very well suited for continuing that economic strength that we've had. And that's one of the things that got me into the race in the first place. I'm very passionate about that. I think Dixon has a ton of potential ahead of it, and I want to put my talents to work for the people.
Thank you. We've come to the end of the allotted time for the debate. We thank Mr. Kuhn and Mr. Arellano for participating. We thank you, the viewers, for watching. The consolidated election will be Tuesday, April 7th. We encourage everyone to study the candidates and the issues and make an informed vote. Thank you and good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lee.
Jeff?